Hi, my name is Charlie Knox. I am a city and regional planner in California, in large part due to the very positive influence of my father, Naphtali Knox, who we're interviewing today for the Planners Emeritus Network archives. And let's just start with some basics about your biography. Where were you born, and how did you first even know about planning?
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1933, and I didn't really know anything about planning until I went to the University of Minnesota and started out as a freshman in chemical engineering or chemistry. That was my intent anyway. But over the summer of my freshman to sophomore year, I chose architecture. And while I was in architecture, I learned about urban planning.
In those days, was urban planning really an established profession, or was it architects who figured out there was a larger scale to work at?
Well, I didn't know it at the time that we were just talking about, but of course planning was a profession, but it was mostly conducted by architects and landscape architects. And later on, when I got to planning school, I found out that there were other people who were also involved in planning. In architecture school, it was just talk about physical design, urban design, but later on it was people from the social sciences and also from law who seemed to be in our graduate classes. Yeah.
So say a little bit about your transition from University of Minnesota to University of Pennsylvania for graduate school. What made you switch from architecture to planning? And tell us a little bit about what was going on in the world of planning, whereby you ended up with some of the brightest lights of the 20th century as classmates and professors.
Architecture was a 5-year course, and my sophomore through 5th year were all involved with architectural design. Studio classes were held in the 3rd and 4th year of those 4 years. And in one of those years, we were tasked with a program, as the students were, to do something about climate difficulties in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Wintertime, how are we going to shield people from the really terrible weather and still keep them downtown, because shopping malls had begun to come in. Victor Gruen had designed something in Fort Worth, I think, or maybe it was a downtown plan.
This is the mid-1950s?
Yeah, mid-1950s. So we focused on St. Paul and Minneapolis. There were 2 teams, one for Minneapolis, one for St. Paul. And what developed out of both of those teams are the sky bridges in those 2 cities, where people can walk through the middle of buildings and across bridges that go across streets and stay indoors all the time. And that was my first introduction to planning per se.
And then how did you find out about Pennsylvania as an option for graduate school? What made you want to go there? And did you know at the time that there was this transition of folks coming from Yale to Penn? And say more about that.
It wasn't Yale. They came from MIT and Harvard. And I didn't know about that. One of my professors, whom I liked very much, and I think he liked me, said, "You're a good student, Knox, but you don't have the design chops that you need to really be a good architect." So we send all of our students on to master's degrees. They all go to MIT or Harvard, and we're very proud of that. But there's this new field called planning, and this guy had just come back from a year abroad, and he was calling supermarkets things like greengrocers because he'd been in Britain. And anyway, he said, try out planning. So I applied to several schools, including Penn, and only Penn would give me a full scholarship and enough money to live on. Harvard and MIT said, "Oh, we'll be glad to help you with your financing your second semester, but you have to prove yourself in your first semester."
Okay.
So I went to Penn, and when I got there, I found out that there had been a kind of major change over the summer. People from MIT and from Harvard, for what reason, the people in the planning schools had decided to come down to Penn because there was this new school that's going to be begun at the University of Pennsylvania. So I had people like Lewis Mumford, who was the author of The City in History, which had just won a prize of some kind. I can't remember which one.
1961 National Book Award.
Oh, all right. There you go. So so that doesn't work. That if he did that, then I'm talking about the wrong book because that was written after I left school. So,
But so Lewis Mumford was there. Who else?
Dave Wallace, David A. Wallace, and Ian McHarg had a firm going, and McHarg taught landscape architecture. Wallace had hired me to work at the redevelopment agency in Philadelphia under Ed Bacon, so I knew both of those guys. And Bill Wheaton was one of the professors that came down from MIT or Harvard. He was the principal author of the 1954 Housing Act, which had a revolution in housing was in store for the United States from that Housing Act. I'm sure there were others.
Well, Bill Wheaton later came to Cal, right? And then
Oh yeah, and Bill was head of the Urban Institute at Cal, I think it was called, and also at Cal at the time was Martin Meyerson,
and
who was the acting chancellor during the free speech movement, whatever that was called.
So to be clear, Martin Meyerson and Bill Wheaton were both at Penn
Yeah.
as professors when you were a student before they both came to
They
Berkeley.
were,
And Louis Kahn.
Louis Kahn was teaching in architecture, but I certainly went to some of his lectures, yeah, it was a great milieu. Loved being there. Meyerson later went on to become president at Penn.
And Alan Jacobs was one of your classmates.
No, he was the year before.
Okay.
And Alan Jacob, when I went from Penn into the Air Force and then to Des Moines and then to San Francisco to work for a firm called Livingston and Blaney in 1960. But Alan Jacobs was the person they really wanted. A guy who worked at the University of California on the faculty named Melvin Weber. And I don't remember all of his books, but Mel Weber was well known at the time at the DCRP faculty. Mel said, you really need to hire somebody from Penn. And they tried to get Alan Jacobs, but Alan Jacobs was, I think, off in Calcutta for the Ford Foundation. So I was the next person they asked, and that's how I got to San Francisco.
So you're part of this wave of planners with phenomenal pedigree who all have done great things, and you've done great things. Tell us about what happened after Penn, starting with the Air Force. What'd you do at the Air Force? And what years were those? And was this part of your voluntary service? Did you go to officer school? How did you get there?
I was an Air ROTC at the University of Minnesota. I got my commission in 1955. I was told that I could go to graduate school. I had to ask for their permission to go to graduate school, and I could take planning, but I had to be monitored by Air University in Montgomery, Alabama. And they said, well, I'm sorry, we can't spare you for 4 semesters. So you'll have to do it in 3. So I crammed it in 3 semesters. I got through in February of '57 at Penn. I went to work, accepted a job for David Wallace in Baltimore. They were doing something to revitalize Charleston Center or whatever it was called. And I went back to Penn to clean out my inbox and mailbox and all that stuff. And there were my orders from the Air Force to report to the Air Force Academy Construction Agency. So I went directly to Colorado Springs and worked there for 2 years. And I met some very interesting people there, one of whom was Walter Netsch, who was the designer of the main designer of the Air Force from the SOM, Skidmore's and Merrill office in Chicago. And I later ran into Walter Netsch at the University of Chicago, where he had designed a couple of buildings, and I was in the role of director of physical planning and construction. So that was a very interesting relationship to keep over the years.
So these were both the Air Force Academy in the late 50s and then University of Chicago in the early 60s or mid 60s. These were both campus site planning, campus master planning type functions, right?
Yeah.
When you were at the Air Force, it was also during the Korean War. What was that like?
I don't remember. Was that Korean War at that time? The guy I worked for was a pilot during the Korean War, and his name was Richard Coffey, and Dick never talked about it.
So one of the stories I remember growing up that I always liked to hear was how you had a driver. So the Air Force Academy was just basically a green field, right? And you were a lieutenant, is that correct?
Yeah, nothing green about it, but
and so your day would largely consist of going out and determining where buildings were going to go, where roads were going to go, and you would
no. I was like a clerk of the works for the Air Force. So I had a project. I was the Air Force representative with the contractor and with the architect on major facilities, the dining hall, the physical playing fields, etc. So we were getting ready for the cadets to come onto campus in the fall of 1959, and this was January, February, and I was out in the field, and there was a cadet looking at me, and I said, "Don't worry, I've never seen one of you either." I mean, I was dressed in some kind of a green parka, olive green parka with a hard hat on, so I was totally out of uniform. But right about that time, I was driving around with one of the sergeants, whose name was Lewis, I think, Sergeant Lewis, and he was somebody who had 27 years of hash marks on his sleeves, and it was a full master sergeant. And one of the cadets saw us, and I got into the car, and he got into the car, but he was driving, and I was just sitting on the passenger side, and this cadet said he wanted to know how a lieutenant, which is what I was, could rate a master sergeant as a driver, because that was usually reserved for generals, and he said that, and so Lewis said, "Yeah, get out of the car, Lieutenant." And we got out of the car, and we just switched places, and I drove.
I thought you were going to say it's because I'm a planner.
No, the poor cadet was flabbergasted. I mean, they were all by the book. That's what they learned, and they still learn.
So like many of us planners, you eventually did your time as a public sector department head, and I'm thinking specifically of the city of Palo Alto in the 1970s, which was a nice place for me to grow up in a sheltered suburban environment with lots of great amenities, but very, very difficult place to work, like many of the cities around the Bay Area and California today. Describe the experience and the difference between all of the other things you've done and being the planning director at the city of Palo Alto.
Well, it took an awful lot of time. I mean, there were lots of meetings. The first week I was there, I had 4 meetings, 4-night meetings, Monday through Thursday. And it just never ended. And our council had 9 council members, and they were notorious for going on forever. Meetings would last till 1 o'clock, sometimes later in the morning. So it was very hard work. Barnum and Bailey said, you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all of the people all the time. Something like that. Maybe he didn't say that. But whoever said it, I characterized Palo Alto as you can please some of the people all of the time, but then I stopped because you really couldn't please any of the people any of the time. So,
well, and I know, since I worked with you in the mid-1980s, that after Palo Alto, one of the real breakthrough projects you worked on was the Petaluma General Plan, which I don't think we knew at the time was involving the concept of growth management, but I think it's often regarded as kind of the first landmark's not the right word, first growth management general plan in California. What's your recollection of that project, and are you happy with how it went, and what do you think its place in history has been?
I think that the growth management plan was developed by a different architect, maybe Corwin Mosine. When I worked for Livingston and Blaney, and I was their senior planner in 1960 to 63, we did a general plan for Petaluma, and that was, I think, 1962. It was a very small booklet, the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Cities around that time were doing general plans, master plans, but I think they were called master plans. because of something called a 701 grant from the federal government. So everybody was doing those, and we got funds, and we did those plans. Sometime after the growth management plan was developed, maybe 5 or 10 years, Petaluma put out a call, an RFP for planning consultants to redo their general plan. And I got the job. I had a number of very fine subcontractors. I recall maybe 5 or 6 at the time. And partly I got the job because I had 25 years earlier, I had done the 1961-62 general plan. So I think we started on that in 1985. I must have hired you around that time. I needed somebody who could write, and you have a master's degree in communication, and that really worked out well.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned it, and I think of some of our compatriots like Barry Miller. I think you had kind of a unique place of being able to win a general plan, put a team together, and manage the whole process. And I'm thinking Walnut Creek and Benicia and others, where it's not kind of the same model that I'm used to, where we work in these days, where there's a prime consulting firm that has more than half of the project and organizes everything. What do you think about the difference between that style of a general plan manager that puts the team together versus what you see more often these days of a large or medium-sized consulting firm that basically sets up the whole thing with subcontractors?
Other than the goals, policies, and programs in the general plan, no general plan that I helped prepare for a city is like the general plan for any other city. My firm was never larger than 7 people. When I went for an interview, I told them that you're looking at what you get. It's a small firm. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be involved. And I think that many of the consultants we were competing with at the time were doing general plans that were 50% boilerplate, things that they'd done before, and they had a lot of similarity. They looked alike, they read alike, and my plans don't do that. Never did.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about your professional associations, right? You were, and I don't know, you're not still AIA, are you anymore? Or no?
I was never AIA. I was in SCUP, the Society for College and University Planning.
And how did that start? You were around around the time that started, right?
Yes, I think it started with a meeting at Penn in 1965. I was just moving at the time from UC statewide, University of California statewide at the Berkeley campus to the University of Chicago. And after I got to the University of Chicago, I got involved with SCUP. As I was assistant vice president for planning at the university and later the director of physical planning and construction for the University of Chicago. And for 6 years, I was a member of and involved with SCUP. In fact, I was a charter member.
And was APA around already at that time, or did APA follow that chronologically?
Well, I think APA has been around for a long time. I joined, it was called the American Institute for Planners, AIP, in 1957 when I was in Colorado at the Air Force Academy. And I remember being involved, I think there was a metro section of the Colorado chapter. I was involved with them at that time. My number for AIP, whatever it is, the AICP, whatever you want to talk about in that profession, my number is 005939.
So 4 digits.
Yeah. So
I used to have an REI number like that.
I've been around for a long time.
So of all these associations, and let's include the California Planning Roundtable, the Northern Section Board, what do you think the contribution has been, or how do you think these professional organizations, including APA, NorCal APA, setting up this Planners Emeritus Network, how can we give back to current and future generations? What's the most important thing that these associations can do?
Well, I think that they're developing substantial and important policies on issues that have never been resolved. I can't really pick them out or tell you what they're working on because I have not been involved since about 1999 with the California Planning Roundtable. But you and I worked on the California General Plan Glossary. That was a project of the California Planning Roundtable. And that has now become embedded in almost every general plan, if not every general plan that's done in California. We needed a glossary of terms where everybody agreed on what a street width meant, or what assisted meant, or what low and moderate income meant. So we formulated that glossary, was it 1990, 91? You remember?
Around that time, yeah.
About that time. And it's now part of the California General Plan guidelines that there be a glossary. I think the glossary must be actually handed out from the state in some fashion. Is it?
Yeah. You know, I find one of the toughest things about being a planner is having to wait to see the change, the physical change in the environment. And I've felt most rewarded when things happened fairly quickly. One of the things that I may misremember, but the way I remember it is, as much pressure as you were under at the City of Palo Alto, and as much as that's a tough place to work, like many other places, your original idea for the every other block, every other side of the street, diagonal parking versus parallel parking, which I believe was pretty vilified and resisted at the time, actually has led to a huge change whereby all the growth that's happened in the Silicon Valley tech boom in Palo Alto has actually been well accommodated downtown. And downtown University Avenue, Palo Alto still feels like a place you can walk. It's much more crowded than it was in the 1970s, but what is your recollection of going through that process of a good idea that now people much later, while you're still alive, so you don't have to be appreciated, you don't have to wait to be appreciated until you have to die like an artist, but tell me about that process. When you go to downtown Palo Alto, you still live a few blocks away. Do you feel that difference from when it was a sleepy hamlet and parking was getting kind of difficult and traffic congestion was getting difficult downtown, and you came up with that idea?
The street width hasn't changed, but there are some bulb outs and things like that have reduced traffic flow. But going back to the very beginning, I got there in 1972. The Stanford Shopping Center had been built just a couple miles away on the other side of El Camino Real, and in 1955, and it hit the downtown of Palo Alto with a great blow, and they had not recovered. So when I got there in 72, there was an 11% vacancy rate on the ground floor in the downtown. And everybody knew we had to focus on that. So one of the city council members, who's these days we would call him a far-right conservative, had a list of 20 things that ought to be done downtown. And he asked me to meet with him for lunch one day. We talked about those things, and I said, well, if you can get the council to approve it, I'd be happy to work on them. So at the next council meeting, they said, go for it. And we pulled in the outer boundaries of the downtown to make it more compact. We provided a higher density commercial ring around the downtown, and all those things just helped it grow very quickly and bounce back. And so the downtown street, the University Avenue, is largely a cosmetic thing, but economically what made downtown Palo work was that 6-month honeymoon that I had. The city council that wanted to take what one of their colleagues suggested in the way of changes, and we worked on those. Those changes were good.
So also in those days, 1974, I think, the first 4 what were then called inclusionary housing units were built in Palo Alto. Tell me about that. You got the idea from back east, and people didn't talk about affordable housing or low-income housing in the same way as we do now at that time, right?
Well, one of the planning commissioners asked me, what are you going to do about affordable housing? We have a Palo Alto Housing Corporation. They try to build units for folks, but nothing's getting done. And Montgomery County, Maryland had drafted an ordinance, which they hadn't yet put into place, about inclusionary housing. And I talked with their planning director, grabbed the idea with his permission, and brought it to Palo Alto. And we were doing the general plan. It was 1974. The plan wasn't completed till 76, but at that point we had a policy document. And in the policy document, we had a policy that said that any housing development over 10 or 15 units, I can't remember what it was, should provide 15 to 20% of affordable housing units. And one of the people who's building one of the last developments in Palo Alto in the very southern corner of the city, said, I would like to help you with this policy. If you let me split some single-family homes into two, I can put duplexes there, and those can be low-income affordable units. And that's what we did. And the first units were occupied in 74.
And
First 4 units in the United States.
In the United States. So I want to ask you in a minute about what you're most proud of, which that's probably one of the candidates. But so that kind of launched in a bigger way your effort to provide affordable housing. Tell me about being the housing bond coordinator as a consultant for Santa Clara County for 20 years, right? 1982 to 2002. What was that like?
Well, I had just tried to open a planning consulting firm, had opened a consulting firm, and I was looking for work, and Santa Clara County advertised for a housing bond coordinator. Reagan was president, inflation was very high, interest rates for construction development were as high as 18 to 20%, or mortgage rates were. So
Wow.
Nothing much was happening. So we were selling mortgage revenue bonds that would provide lower cost money in the neighborhood of 6% or 8% to developers. And Santa Clara County asked for people who would be the housing bond coordinator. I interviewed. I got the job. For quite a while we worked on that. We established a lot of funds from that because every bond issue provided us with some money. And eventually we had a $1 million pot, which we used to start a housing trust fund for Santa Clara County as well.
And so this led to direct down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers?
Around 88 or 89, we started the mortgage credit certificate program. And that was direct first-time assistance for home buyers. And by the time I left in 2002, we had issued about 10,000 of those mortgage credit certificates, the MCCs, which helped a lot of people get into their first homes.
So you have a lot of candidates in this sphere. You've got the work at the Air Force, the time at Penn, Petaluma General Plan, a bunch of other awards. You won the National APA 2005 Award for a Distinguished Planner nationwide. What are you most proud of? What's the thing you look back on and think, this is really the thing that I did that I want to be my legacy?
I don't know about legacy, but I really consider myself to be pro-housing, and I did everything I could in those 20 years with Santa Clara County and also in the preparation of housing elements for general plans to push for affordable housing. I did a housing element for the town of Hillsborough twice, and in 1995 I was working with another consultant, and our housing element didn't get approved. I don't remember when I did the next one, but it got approved, and I went to Sacramento and I told these people that this Hillsborough is a unique community. It has these mansions on very, very large lots, nothing smaller than an acre. And on the other hand, they have a lot of employees who live in their houses, cooks, maids, nannies, and these people live in separate units, which sometimes have cooking facilities, sometimes have bathrooms, sometimes don't. And we worked out something called an assisted dwelling unit that could be in the house and could be counted as a unit because it was actually housing a low and moderate income family.
So was assisted before, was ever called accessory?
I don't recall.
Something like that?
I don't recall. And most of them were illegal. They'd never been permitted. So we found a way to make sure that they had bathroom facilities, kitchen facilities, separate access, and that they could be counted. And we got approved for that housing element.
So when you see all of these new new efforts by the state legislature, SB 9, ADU law, the new housing bills that are constantly in flux, do you feel like the state of California, the legislators have finally understood the importance and the need to build many, many units of affordable housing? And do you think these efforts are working? Is this the best we can do? Is there something we haven't thought of that we should be doing instead?
It's been 51 years since Palo Alto did their had their first four inclusionary units. A lot of those have been built since then. It's taken people a long time to do that. It's still difficult. There's still city councils, Goleta recently, that have been told by the state, you have to approve this project. A lot has been done, and it's being carried forward. I think what every planner realizes, first of all, people don't like change.
Yeah.
So I think that was the first lesson I learned. And the second lesson was that city council members are short timers.
Yeah.
They're looking for how they get elected the next 4 years. And they're not looking out 20 years. And to do something like change the housing approach to housing, the development, the building of housing, takes a long-range look. We were all trained in long-range planning, but convincing council members that that's what they should do was very difficult, if not impossible. And I don't know how easy it is now. It wouldn't be happening now if it wasn't for the cudgel wielded by the state government.
Well, it's public service is a very high calling. You've done it. I've done it. It seems like somewhere in the 80s, the ethic was the consultants work harder and burn the midnight oil, and it was easier to be in the public sector. And I just don't think that's true at all anymore. I think it's very, very difficult to thrive and survive and feel appreciation and community bonds in the public sector, and it's a struggle every day. And as a consultant, late career for me, much of what I want to do is assist my public sector colleagues in achieving those goals. But I think your wisdom is very appropriate, that we need to always keep that look to the next couple decades, which is hard to do, right? Because what's in front of you is so important. So what's your advice, guidance to people who are interested in the planning profession, going through school, coming out of school today? And one thing I'll add to this is, a lot of idealism that's associated with youth wants to do things like try to reverse climate change and ensure environmental justice and equity within the lens of reality, and knowing how the public sector planning world works, how politics works, what consultants can do. What's your top advice to people interested in going into planning today?
Take care of yourself. Don't get angry. Whatever it results is going to be something different from what you envision. Lead by allowing others to take credit for what you think might be good ideas. But first of all, take care of yourself. I think if you don't have the stamina, if you don't have the brain power, you need to relax and make sure that you feed those things first.
Easier said than done, right?
It's got to be done. I'm 92 and I'm still here. I haven't, and I didn't practice planning until I practiced until I was 76. I had practiced so long I finally got it right. So, yeah, age 76, 2009, and I have been the editor of Northern News. Had been for 17 years, from 2005 to 2022. I really enjoyed that. It let me keep my fingers in the pie and kind of give back to the community. I think another thing I would say to planners, especially those who are at retirement age or already retired, is, are you giving back? Sure, it was hard work. Sure, it took a lot out of you, but how can you help your community of planners, and how can you help your own community?
Excellent thoughts. Anything else you want to say for the archives or for general good of the order?
Yeah. Are you sorry you came to work for me in 1985? Or?
I am not. I'm glad that what I thought was my chosen profession morphed into planning, and I'm very proud of the work we did together, and even some of the work that I've done on my own and with other colleagues. And I think you've set a great example for planners in California of how to stay balanced and focused, but also accept reality and change. I always think of the phrase, there's two things that people know they don't like in planning. One is density and the other is sprawl. So you're always going to run, and especially in the public sector, you're always going to run into someone who just associates you with the job and it's your fault. And, all the years I worked in Telluride, I felt like it was only demonstrated by everyone being the same amount suspicious of outcomes and the same amount blaming of not getting what they wanted, that just showed you found the center of community. I wish there were a way that that center of community for a public sector planner could feel a lot more like love and appreciation, but it just doesn't often.
Well, thank you for taking the time to interview me. I really appreciate it. I don't think we've ever had a conversation this long that hasn't been interrupted by a grandchild or an iPhone or whatever. So this has been nice. It's our most productive, perhaps, too. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure and my honor. Thank you.